Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Enterprise AI News. I am your host, Troy Angerdon. I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Ian Wilson. Ian, how are you?
Great.
So what are we going to be covering today? I think you said you had gathered together some random news
Yeah,
of the week for us.
bit of a smorgasbord, I think is the right word.
All
And
right.
here's the first one up. A news release from Gartner. And the title of this is Gartner predicts half of finance AI projects will be delayed or cancelled by 2024. So that's quite a big headline. And
Wow.
I think so when they say finance AI, I think they're talking about particularly finance as a business function as opposed to financial services per se. But I think it stretches across both, and it's very much why I brought this up is it resonates with me because it's very much aligned with what I see with many businesses and how their projects are going. And some of the things they focus on are really barriers to scaling. So if we just talk about some of the issues they see, they say, well, finance departments have made reasonable progress in laying the groundwork for AI. And that groundwork is not foundations. I think it's more about they've done some use cases. The challenge is kind of attempting to scale up solutions that can manage the complexities of function-wide use, or even I would say business-wide use. So I think this use of the word groundwork here is probably not the best word because it kind of implies that companies have put the foundations in and then they're having problems scaling. But that's not what's happening. They've done a lot of work putting like data architectures in, built a lot of use cases, but then trying to scale that is a problem. And the scaling problem is because they haven't put foundations in.
Mm.
And interestingly, also, it talks about digital automation being a problem because it's not giving the benefits everyone expects. And one of the big reasons is that whenever you put automation in, there are always error cases, always exceptions, and they get pushed off to people. And what tends to happen is you put in this automation, this robotic process automation, and maybe you've got, 3, 5 people in a certain department, you still need to keep them on to handle all the exceptions.
Mm.
And so you end up really not getting anywhere in terms of benefit because you can't get that extra mile. And I think that's endemic across all industries. Everyone's seeing that. So they're seeing all these barriers. And another interesting item is the costly upfront infrastructure. Businesses realize when they get into this that they need to spend an awful lot on their data architecture, their data infrastructure, their AI tools,
Mhm.
their infrastructure for compute. And this kind of ties into what we've just been talking about when
Mhm.
we started to talk about cloud infrastructure.
Right.
And I think this is what's going to push a lot of businesses to start moving to cloud. And they will, in the wake of that, cancel a lot of the plans that they put in place where they were looking at things like building on-premise infrastructures. And I think those are all going to fall by the wayside. So I think it's a good call by Gar, really resonates with me. And I think if you're in the industry, this is definitely something to be well aware of.
I see this as probably a healthy reality check.
Yeah.
Like a lot of folks probably dove into it. That I agree with you. I think groundwork is not the same as putting proper foundations in place. As you and I have discussed a lot, foundations would be a center of excellence, and the basics of finding some internal leaders and advocates and building the team correctly, and all the things that you've talked about in a lot of different episodes. So I think what's happened is probably they've done some work. They looked at it and said, well, we did a bunch of work, but we got very little return.
Mm,
And now we're going to sort of step back and assess and say, well, are we on the right track? Are we doing the right things?
yeah.
Should we retrench a bit and kind of rethink how we're doing this? It's probably healthy, right?
It's probably healthy, and I would hope just on a bias point that they might come to me and say, okay, how do we do this properly?
Exactly. That would be my advice. Go
Which I
talk to
know
Ian.
that would hope that they will go to Gartner and ask them the same thing. I know Gartner has a great team as well, so
Yeah.
hats off to them for that call.
Yeah. That's great.
So let's take a look at another one that's interesting. Meta shakes up AI unit amid drive for growth. And what this is talking about, I'm not going to scroll down, I'll just tell you what it is that Meta is breaking up their AI unit, which is significant. They've got thousands of people in it, which is pretty significant. And they're pushing all of those people into the business units. And I think this is a forerunner of what every enterprise and every business will do. And I think Meta is kind of at the forefront of that. And essentially what's happening is they're building AI into the DNA of their business, the very fabric of their business.
Mhm.
So every part of their business will have AI. And the reason they're able to do that is because they're essentially a software company, they're mature enough to be able to actually take that step. Most businesses, as we've just seen with the Gartner discussion, are nowhere close
Right.
to being able to do that. But Meta is taking that step. So they won't have central AI function with a central AI leader who's unfortunately stepping aside from this point. Good luck to him in the future. But they're building all of those teams as part of every business function, every software development, every project will have kind of AI baked into it. And essentially, then your software engineer will be expected to understand AI as well, which I think is, very much the way businesses will move in future. And I think, if you look back 20, 30 years, probably 30 years, you would have had dedicated database teams. Now, every developer knows how to set up a connection to a database and put in a database. So you don't need a separate team to do that. Obviously, AI is a bit more complex than that, but I think this is a foreshadowing of what every business will do at some point. But for most businesses, this is, at least 10 years down the road.
I was just going to say that I have two thoughts on this. One, you and I have talked a lot about in your course, you talk about the idea of the center of excellence, which we touched on a second ago, the idea of being that you start centralized, then you might have a strong central body with some resources in each of the different business units and or teams. And then eventually it might disperse completely and become completely fully distributed, where this becomes just part of the makeup of the organization. So I think what's super interesting about comparing and contrasting the two stories is that we see that Meta is at the far, far bleeding edge.
Yep.
They've had a massive centralized organization, and they're dispersing it into or federating it into their other teams and units, as they should. And then you get the other end, 10 year prior, it's almost like 10 years behind, the finance company saying, well, we did a bunch of stuff, it didn't pay off. We don't really know what to do. So we're going to actually slow down our projects. To me, that's just it's the old William Gibson joke or trope about the future's here. It just isn't widely distributed yet.
Right.
Meta is kind of current, and the financial function in these enterprise companies is kind of 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see this stuff play out because everybody's living in different timelines.
It's a good contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's take a look at another article. This follows up from something that we've talked quite a bit about, and it's topical because it's defense related, but also this is ongoing, which is why it keeps coming up recently.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about AI in the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, and we talked in a previous episode about the former Lyft executive becoming the chief data and analytics officer for the Department of Defense. But this is talking about a lot of recently departed officials having expressed frustration at the pace of change in the Pentagon. And you had mentioned that some people had left, and it seems that there has been quite an exodus of people leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And their new CEO, who's Craig Martell, seems very well aware of this, calls it valid criticism that there's a lot of frustration at their slow progress. And I think obviously, this is not just a Pentagon issue, not just a Department of Defense issue, but a lot of enterprises have all these great ideas about how to use data and AI, but they need to challenge the culture issue first, because if their people are not going to change, it doesn't matter how whiz-bang you make your use cases and build your platforms if they're not going to implement them.
I give this guy 18 months before he quits or is fired and is replaced by that next guy. And it's, no slam on him. He was at Lyft. They've done some incredible machine learning work, some of the top work in the world. But to me, this is the cog in the wheel saying, I'm going to change the engine. And I think it was Buckminster Fuller, that old quote, you don't change things by fighting the existing system. You build a new model that makes the old one kind of obsolete. You can't fix the system from within the system, but they're going to hire a new AI guy and he's going to change the military industrial complex. Good luck. I just don't see it.
Right. See how it goes. I wish him well. Hope he can change. But well, If you're watching this, Craig, comment below.
I wish him the best of luck. I really, truly do. I'm not trying to be negative about the opportunity, but I think changing systems that are that big and have that many entrenched interests.
It's a challenge. Very quick one. This is just funny, I thought. AI shopping startup exaggerates tech capabilities to potential investors.
Shocker.
So what this company was doing, apparently they were pre-filling payment forms with customers' details, which sounds like a great service. Using AI, turns out AI was short for workers in call centers in the Philippines.
That's actually very common.
So it is. And I mean, if they got the job done, great, but actually it was costing a lot more than they were saying it was costing, apparently. So just a word of caution for you, investors into AI technologies, maybe go and try out that first, make sure it works and it's not just routing.
AI washing is alive and well.
Yes. So that was a quick one. One you brought up, could just mention quickly, maybe you want to talk about this one.
Yeah, this thing is just exploding. So a random researcher grabs some tooling from Hugging Face and builds a bot, basically trains it on a lot of really ridiculous speech that's found in one particular channel. Can't remember the channel on 4chan. And shocker, it basically posted 30 or 40,000 comments that were, just racist and obnoxious and terrible and everything else. And it's become this, oh yeah, it was the politically incorrect / POL board and predictable results. I mean, he used some good tooling, he used this good tooling, trained it on a bunch of politically incorrect text. And guess what? Shocker, it actually works and it generates more politically incorrect text.
Well, apparently this guy is just a YouTuber, and his point was to do that, for it to spew crap out to these people on this board who didn't realize it was even a bot, because the rubbish it was spewing out was the rubbish they were talking about anyway.
And then a bunch of them fell for it and thought it was another one of them, talking on the board. I actually think the whole thing is pretty funny. Someone's going to slam me for that, but I think
I mean, that was the point. It was for a YouTube video.
Yeah. And it was done as a stunt. And now again, back to the AI ethics thing, we have these ethicists wringing their hands saying, oh, this is so terrible, it wouldn't have passed an ethics board review and all this kind of stuff. I think these are the kinds of culture war things that are going to continue to happen. I actually think they have to happen so that we can have these kinds of conversations. This person has demonstrated clearly garbage in, garbage out. If you train it with politically incorrect or unacceptable content, it will spew that on the other end. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who works in AI, but that could be a surprise to people who are outside of the AI field and don't understand.
That's actually quite an interesting point by itself, isn't it? Definitely the canonical version of garbage in, garbage out. So one last one that's, non-controversial at all, but something I'm going to next week, hopefully if I've got time. The AI Summit in London. They have another one in New York later on in the year. This is 15th and 16th of June. So I guess I better put this video up before the 15th and 16th of June.
Yes.
So if you're watching after the 15th and 16th of June, my bad. And this is at Tobacco Dock, if you know what that is. If you don't, Google next week. So if you're looking for an AI event, and these guys put on great events.
Yeah, I've said that before.
Yeah, I've worked with them in the past, and this is very much focused on kind of enterprise AI as well, business AI. So it's very much an enterprisey kind of event, and something I'll be going to, and I'll pop a link in the below, again, as long as it's before the 15th and 16th of June. I'll also put a link to the one in New York, because obviously a lot of people might get to that, which is, memory serves me right, it's in September. I think they've also got one in San Francisco too, so I'll put a link to that as well.
Great. Excellent. Well, I think we must be at the end of the news episode for today. So thanks for all those, Ian. I guess we'll catch up on the next episode. So if you enjoy these quick updates, you know what to do. It really helps us out. If you can like or comment, drop a note in the bottom. Just tell us what you liked or didn't like about the episode. Feel free to share it, obviously, on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you hang out. And we will see you on the next episode.
See you on the next one.